Here's something that wasn't supposed to happen. The two most hyped edge rushers in the entire 2025 draft class, guys who were being mocked as high as number 2 and 3 overall for months, both of them slipped past the top 7. David Bailey and Ruben Baines, two names that were practically tattooed onto the top 5 of every single mock draft board from January through April, somehow watched as team after team passed on them. And nobody in the draft community could fully explain why. But that wasn't even the wildest part. While elite pass rushers were falling like dominoes, the quarterback class was turning into one of the most debated and criticized groups we've seen in years. Analysts were drawing direct comparisons to some of the most infamous quarterback draft classes in NFL history. Names like Christian Ponder, E.J. Manuel, and Zach Wilson started getting thrown around, and not as compliments. The 2025 quarterback crop was being called thin, risky, and downright terrifying for any general manager brave enough to bet their career on one of these guys. And then there was Clemson, a program sitting on 4 potential first-round picks, a team that looked like a legitimate playoff contender early in the season, completely collapsed. 4 blue-chip prospects scattered across the first round, and yet the program itself couldn't get out of its own way. What happened behind those doors in Death Valley? Rumors started swirling, and the answers might be more uncomfortable than anyone expected. This draft told us something about the direction the NFL is heading. Teams are terrified of quarterbacks. Edge rushers aren't being valued the way they used to be. And versatility has quietly become the most important trait a prospect can have. So let's break down everything that went down, the picks that made sense, the ones that didn't, and the moves that could haunt franchises for the next decade. And trust me, some of these decisions are going to age very, very poorly. Let's start where every draft conversation starts, the quarterbacks. And honestly, this might be the most unsettling quarterback situation we've seen in a long time. Fernando Mendoza went early to the Raiders, and while that pick didn't shock anyone on the surface, the concerns surrounding him were louder than usual. Critics have been pointing out for months that Mendoza operated a simplified offensive system in college. He reportedly stayed locked onto his first read far too often, and when the pressure came, things got ugly fast. His ability to process information under duress has been a massive red flag for scouts. But here's the thing. Despite all of that noise, everyone in the draft community seemed to accept that Mendoza was going to be the guy for Las Vegas. It was almost like the football world collectively shrugged and said, "Yeah, he's got issues, but who else are you going to take?" And that right there tells you everything about how weak this quarterback class really was. Now, the name that kept popping up throughout the entire first round was Ty Simpson out of Alabama. And this is where the conversation gets really interesting. Simpson has the physical tools. He's got the arm, he's got the mobility, and when you watch his tape, there are flashes of a legitimate NFL starter in there. But there's one massive problem that nobody can seem to get past. 7 games. That's it. That's the sample size the NFL is working with when it comes to Ty Simpson's really good film. 7 games of solid tape, and teams are supposed to bet $20, $30 million on that. Some scouts have been vocal about the fact that 7 games just isn't enough to evaluate a franchise quarterback. You need to see how a guy handles adversity over an entire season. You need to see how he adjusts when defenses start scheming specifically against him. You need to see if he can maintain his level of play when the pressure of a full college campaign starts wearing on him physically and mentally. With Simpson, you just don't have those answers yet. And that brings us to the name that's been generating the most buzz behind closed doors, Garrett Nussmeier. Now, if you've been paying attention to the draft media cycle, you've probably noticed that Nussmeier's name has been climbing steadily for weeks. He went from an afterthought to a legitimate first-round conversation almost overnight, and some people in the industry aren't buying it. There have been rumblings, and these are just rumors at this point, that the sudden push for Nussmeier might be agent-driven. Some analysts have pointed to Dan Orlovsky's coverage and suggested that there's a coordinated effort to inflate Nussmeier's draft stock. Now, to be clear, that's speculation. Nobody has proven anything, and it's entirely possible that Nussmeier's rise is completely organic and based on legitimate film study. But the timing of it all has raised eyebrows. Here's what makes the Nussmeier conversation fascinating, though. If you're going to apply the same logic to him that people apply to Ty Simpson, meaning you're evaluating based on a limited but impressive film sample, then Nussmeier actually holds up pretty well. He operated an NFL-style offense at LSU. He made reads that translate to the professional level. He showed poise in big moments. So if 7 games of good Ty Simpson film is enough to make him a first-rounder, then why wouldn't a comparable amount of impressive Nussmeier tape warrant the same conversation? And then there's Will Howard, the national champion, the guy who transferred from Kansas State to Ohio State and led the Buckeyes to the promised land. Howard's draft stock skyrocketed during that championship run, and there's a legitimate contingent of scouts who believe he's being undervalued. He's got the size, the toughness, and the intangibles that certain franchises love. He feels like a Pittsburgh Steeler, doesn't he? Big frame, Midwest mentality, gritty competitor. If the Steelers don't address their quarterback situation in the first round, don't be surprised if Howard's name comes up as a guy they seriously consider. But the elephant in the room with this entire quarterback class is the ghosts of drafts past, and those ghosts are loud. Christian Ponder went 12th overall in 2011. E.J. Manuel went 16th in 2013. Zach Wilson went 2nd overall in 2021. Trey Lance went 3rd in that same class. These were all quarterbacks who were taken in the first round despite significant concerns, and every single one of them turned into cautionary talees. The comparison that really stings is the Sam Darnold one. There have been whispers that Will Levis, who went in the 2nd round not long ago, might be getting the Sam Darnold treatment, meaning the league is going to try to convince itself that he can still be salvaged, put some new tread on the tires, and give him another shot somewhere. History tells us that rarely works, but the NFL loves nothing more than convincing itself that this time will be different. What we're seeing in 2025 is a league that has been burned so many times by first-round quarterbacks that it's almost paralyzed. Teams are scared. They don't trust the evaluation process anymore, and honestly, can you blame them? But the fear of picking the wrong quarterback is creating its own set of problems, and those problems were on full display throughout the rest of this draft. Now here's where things got truly wild. David Bailey and Ruben Baines were consensus top 5 picks for the majority of the pre-draft process. These weren't fringe guys. These weren't prospects who needed everything to break right to sneak into the top 10. These were bona fide, blue-chip, franchise-altering pass rushers that every mock draft in existence had going in the first handful of picks. And yet, when the draft actually unfolded, both of them sat there. Pick after pick, team after team, and neither name got called until pick 8 and beyond. That's not a minor slide. That's a full-blown earthquake in the draft world. So what happened? Let's start with Ruben Baines. The knock on Baines has been consistent for a while now. Short arms. That's the criticism that has followed him throughout the evaluation process. Now, in the context of edge rushing, arm length matters. It affects a player's ability to create separation from offensive tackles, it impacts their ability to set the edge against the run, and it limits some of the pass rush moves available to them at the next level. Scouts have been vocal about the fact that while Baines is talented, his physical limitations could cap his ceiling as a professional. But here's the counter-argument. The tape doesn't lie. Baines was productive. He got to the quarterback. He disrupted plays. He did everything you want an edge rusher to do against top-level college competition. So the question becomes, are teams overthinking the measurables and ignoring the production? It's happened before, and it'll happen again. Then there's David Bailey, and this is where the evaluation gets even more nuanced. Bailey is explosive, like genuinely freakish level explosive. When he fires off the line of scrimmage, he generates the kind of burst that makes offensive linemen look like they're standing in cement. The athletic testing backed up what the eye test already told everyone. This kid is an elite-level athlete. But the concern with Bailey is bend. Can he turn the corner at the NFL level? Does he have the flexibility to dip under tackles and convert that straight-line speed into actual sacks? Some scouts believe the answer is yes, that the bend will come with coaching and repetition. Others aren't so sure. They see a player who wins with power and explosion but might struggle against the best tackles in the world when those tackles are able to get their hands on him and redirect that speed. The Saints ultimately pulled the trigger on Bailey at 8, and the reasoning was sound. Their evaluation was simple. David Bailey is the best pass rusher in this entire draft. He's got more juice than Baines. He's more twitchy. He's more dynamic as an athlete. And at pick 8, you can't pass up on that kind of talent regardless of the concerns. But the fact that a player of Bailey's caliber was available at 8 in the first place tells you something about how the league is shifting its evaluation of edge rushers. It's not enough to be explosive anymore. Teams want the complete package, and if there's even one question mark, they're willing to let elite talent slide. And then there's the wild card in this whole edge rusher conversation. Arvell Reese out of Ohio State. Now, Reese is a fascinating prospect because nobody can seem to agree on what he actually is. Some scouts have him labeled as an edge rusher. Others see him as a Swiss Army knife defender who can line up at multiple positions. And then there are those who believe he's primarily an off-ball linebacker who happens to have an elite ability to blitz. That positional ambiguity can be a blessing or a curse, depending on how a team deploys him. Going to the Jets, there's a system in place that could theoretically maximize his versatility. But the question remains, if you can't definitively say what position a guy plays, does that make him more valuable or less valuable? In this draft, it seems like teams are leaning toward versatility as a premium trait, and Reese's ability to do multiple things well is what got him drafted where he was. The edge rusher situation in this draft revealed something fundamental about how NFL front offices are evolving. The days of just taking the best pass rusher available because you can never have enough pass rushers might be coming to an end. Teams are being more selective, more analytical, and more willing to let perceived top talent slide if the fit isn't perfect. Whether that's smart or whether that's teams outsmarting themselves remains to be seen. But what happened with Bailey and Baines will be studied and debated for years. This might be the most fascinating storyline of the entire draft, and it has nothing to do with any single pick. It's about a program. Clemson University had 4 legitimate first-round talents in this class: Peter Woods, Avian Terrell, Blake Miller, T.J. Parker. 4 guys from the same school, all with first-round grades, all projected to hear their names called on the biggest night of their lives. And yet, the team they played for couldn't put it together when it mattered most. Think about that for a second. 4 first-round picks on one roster. That's an embarrassment of riches. That's the kind of talent concentration that should have Clemson competing for a national championship, not stumbling through a disappointing season that left fans, analysts, and even the players themselves wondering what went wrong. Early in the season, there was a matchup between Clemson and LSU that had everyone buzzing. People were calling it a playoff preview. Both teams looked loaded. Both teams looked like they were on a collision course with greatness. And then reality set in. LSU kept climbing. Clemson started falling apart. And by the end of the year, those early season expectations looked almost laughable. So what happened? Rumors have been circulating, though none of them have been confirmed. Some insiders suggest there were internal issues within the program. Others point to coaching decisions that didn't maximize the talent on the roster. And then there are those who believe it was simply a case of too much individual talent not translating into team cohesion. Whatever the reason, Dabo Swinney has some serious questions to answer. Peter Woods went in the first round, and the scouting report on him is intriguing. He can play inside, he can slide outside, and he just gets after the quarterback. His motor runs hot, and he brings a physicality that defensive coordinators love. The Panthers snatched him up, pairing him with their interior defensive lineman from Auburn, and the idea of those two massive humans occupying the middle of that defensive line is enough to make every running back in the NFC South lose sleep. Avian Terrell is another Clemson product who generated significant first-round buzz. He's got the pedigree, he's got the physical tools, and in a draft class where corners were at a premium, he was always going to hear his name called early. But there were questions about consistency, about whether he showed up in the biggest moments when his team needed him the most. Those questions tied directly back to Clemson's overall struggles as a program. Blake Miller, the offensive tackle, has been a bit of a polarizing prospect. Some evaluators had him going as high as the teens. Others felt he was more of a late first-round value. His technique is sound, his size is legitimate, but there are concerns about whether he has the nastiness and physicality that elite offensive tackles need at the professional level. And TJ Parker was still sitting on the board deep into the first round, which in itself is a statement about how Clemson's season impacted the perception of their individual players. When a program underperforms, it creates doubt about every prospect on that roster. Fair or not, that's the reality of the NFL draft process. The Clemson situation is a cautionary tale for every major college program. You can recruit at the highest level. You can stockpile five-star talents and future first-round picks. But if the coaching, the culture, and the development aren't there, all that talent means nothing. And the ripple effects of a disappointing season don't just impact the win-loss record. They follow every single player from that program into the draft process and potentially cost them millions of dollars in draft position. What happened at Clemson in 2025 deserves a deeper investigation, and something tells me the full story hasn't been told yet. Every draft has a position group that generates the most debate, and in 2025, it was the wide receivers. The headliner here was Cardell Tate out of Ohio State, a player who stayed in the state when the Cleveland Browns snatched him up. And the narrative around Tate has been one of the more entertaining subplots of this entire draft cycle. The critics came out early. His 40 time was slow. For a wide receiver expected to go in the first round, his speed testing numbers raised legitimate concerns. In an era where the NFL is obsessed with speed, where sub-4 40 times have become almost a prerequisite for first-round receiver consideration, Tate's numbers were a red flag for some evaluators. But here's what the stopwatch doesn't tell you. Cardell Tate is smooth, like Rolls-Royce smooth. When you watch the tape, something doesn't add up. For a guy who supposedly doesn't have elite speed, he always seems to be 5 or 6 yards behind the defense. He never gets caught from behind. He gets off the line of scrimmage with a fluidity that makes his release look effortless. His hands are reliable, his route running is precise, and his production was undeniable. There's a lesson in the Tate evaluation that applies to every draft. Numbers matter, but context matters more. A 40-yard dash is run in shorts on a track with no pads and no defenders. Football is played in pads on grass with 11 guys trying to stop you. And when you watch Tate play actual football, the slow label starts to feel really, really lazy. Then there's the Jordan Tyson versus Luther Burden debate, which consumed an enormous amount of draft discourse. Both were considered potential WR1s in this class, depending on who you asked. Tyson came with injury concerns that made some teams nervous. A history of physical setbacks at the college level always creates hesitation, because teams have to project whether a player's body can hold up to the rigors of a 17-game NFL season plus playoffs. Burden, on the other hand, had a different kind of red flag. Reports surfaced that his draft interviews raised some concerns among front offices. Now, the specifics of what was said in those interviews haven't been fully disclosed. That's how it usually works. Teams keep those conversations private, and information leaks out in vague, sometimes misleading ways. But the mere existence of interview concerns for a top wide receiver prospect is enough to create uncertainty. The Minnesota Vikings ultimately landed Burden, pairing him with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. And on paper, that receiving core is absolutely ridiculous. If Sam Darnold or whoever is quarterbacking, that team can't find success throwing to Jefferson, Addison, and Burden, then the problem isn't the weapons. Kevin O'Connell, the so-called quarterback whisperer, now has arguably the most talented receiving group in football. This is his last chance to prove that the label is deserved. The wide receiver market in 2025 also reflected a broader trend in the NFL. Teams are willing to invest heavily in pass catchers because the league has become so quarterback-centric that surrounding your signal caller with elite weapons is seen as non-negotiable. Even teams with questionable quarterback situations are loading up on receivers, hoping that the talent around the position will either elevate the quarterback they have or attract a better one in free agency or trade. Kenan Sadiq, the tight end out of Oregon, added another dimension to the receiving conversation. He went to the Buccaneers, and the reasoning was straightforward. Baker Mayfield just lost Mike Evans. The red zone production that Evans provided for years is gone, and somebody has to fill that void. Sadiq is a freak athlete, a mismatch nightmare who can line up in multiple spots and create problems for linebackers and safeties alike. Baker Mayfield is widely considered a fringe top 15 quarterback. He's good enough to win games, good enough to make the playoffs, but the question has always been whether he can take a team deep into January. The theory is simple. The more weapons you put around Baker, the higher his ceiling becomes. And Sadiq might be exactly the kind of weapon that pushes Mayfield from good to genuinely dangerous. The receiving class of 2025 was deep, talented, and full of debates that won't be resolved for years. But the evaluations and the decisions made around these players tell us a lot about what NFL teams value and what they're willing to overlook when the talent is undeniable. Some of the most revealing moments in any draft aren't the picks that make perfect sense. They're the ones that make you tilt your head and wonder what a front office is thinking. And the 2025 draft had plenty of those. Let's start with the Dallas Cowboys. America's team found themselves in a position where they needed an edge rusher badly. Their defensive line was thin, their pass rush was almost non-existent, and every mock draft had them targeting one of the premium edge talents in this class. And what did they do? They took C.J. Allen, a linebacker, an old-school, gritty sideline-to-sideline linebacker who isn't going to wow anyone with his athleticism, but will absolutely fill run gaps and hit you in the mouth. Now, C.J. Allen is a good player. Nobody is disputing that. He's the kind of linebacker who reminds you of a different era of football, when linebackers were valued for their toughness and their instincts rather than their speed and coverage ability. He's going to tackle everything that moves. He's going to stick his nose where it needs to be. And for a Cowboys defense that has been pushed around in the run game, that kind of physicality is desperately needed. But here's the concern. The NFL has evolved. Linebackers who can't cover are becoming liabilities. The passing game has become so sophisticated that if you can't drop into coverage and match up with tight ends and running backs in space, offensive coordinators are going to exploit you every single week. Allen's value is undeniable in certain defensive schemes, but if the Cowboys are facing Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, or Patrick Mahomes in January, is a run-stuffing linebacker going to be enough? The Cowboys doubled down later in the first round by taking Kendrick Falk, a 6'6" physical specimen who can play multiple positions along the defensive line. The idea is versatility. Falk can line up on the edge, he can kick inside, and he's going to be a force against the run. But there's a difference between can play multiple positions and dominates at one position. And for a team that desperately needed a true difference maker rushing the passer, spreading their resources across multiple positions might not solve the fundamental problem. Then there's Pittsburgh. The Steelers are in one of the most precarious situations in football right now. Aaron Rodgers is their quarterback, and while Rodgers is still capable of playing at a high level on any given Sunday, the reality is that he's at the tail end of his career. There's no succession plan in place. There's no young quarterback waiting in the wings. And the Steelers have been drafting at the bottom of the first round for so long because of their consistent competitiveness that they might not have the draft capital to move up and get one when they finally need to. This is the trap that good organizations fall into. You're too good to tank. You're too good to get a top 5 pick, but you're not quite good enough to win a championship. And every year that passes without addressing the quarterback position is another year closer to the cliff that every aging quarterback eventually falls off of. The Steelers were in a prime position to take Ty Simpson and start developing their future. Instead, there's a chance they let that opportunity pass, banking on Rodgers to give them one more run. Rumors suggest that if Pittsburgh doesn't draft a quarterback, they might look at Will Howard as a potential answer. Howard fits the Steelers' identity perfectly. He's tough, he's physical, and he just led Ohio State to a national championship. But waiting until the second or third round to address your most important position is always a gamble, especially when you know the clock is ticking on your current starter. The Tennessee Titans made an interesting philosophical statement with their approach. Despite having Tony Pollard and a running back room that had already shown flashes of productivity, the desire was to add Jeremiah Love and double down on the ground game. The reasoning was simple: make the quarterback's job easier. Build a physical, dominant running game, and let the play-action passing attack flow from that foundation. It's a strategy that goes against the current NFL trend of prioritizing the passing game above all else. But there's something refreshing about a team that looks at its roster and says, we're not going to chase what everyone else is doing. We're going to play to our strengths and impose our will. Whether that works in a league that's increasingly built around quarterbacks and receivers remains to be seen, but you have to respect the conviction. And then there's Carolina. The Panthers are still in the Bryce Young era, and every pick they make is being evaluated through the lens of whether it helps or hurts Young's development. Adding Peter Woods on the defensive side was a statement that the front office isn't putting all their eggs in the save Bryce Young basket. They're building a complete roster, which is smart in theory. But at some point, if Young doesn't develop into a legitimate franchise quarterback, none of the defensive additions in the world are going to matter. The common thread across all these decisions is fear. Fear of making the wrong move at quarterback. Fear of reaching for a need instead of taking the best available player. Fear of going against conventional wisdom. And in the NFL, fear-based decisions almost always come back to haunt you. While the big names dominated the headlines, some of the most impactful picks in this draft flew under the radar. And if history has taught us anything, it's that the picks nobody talks about on draft night are often the ones that end up defining franchises. Kadyn Proctor out of Alabama was one of the most fascinating selections in the entire first round. The Cowboys took him with the idea of building a physically dominant offensive line, and the reasoning was crystal clear. No more finesse. No more pass-blocking specialists who fold when the play calls for them to drive a defender 5 yards off the ball. Proctor is a road grader. He's the kind of lineman who wants to punish you, who wants to make you regret lining up across from him, and who thrives in a power-running scheme. Now, the Alabama offensive line has a complicated reputation at the NFL level. Some of their linemen have translated beautifully to the pros. Others have struggled mightily. There's a concern that Proctor might have more of a guard build than a tackle build. And for a team that already has injury concerns at the tackle position, adding another player with positional uncertainty isn't exactly a bulletproof strategy. But the philosophy behind the pick is sound. If you want to compete in the AFC North, arguably the most physical division in football, you need linemen who embrace the violence of the position. Proctor does that. And if he can stay healthy and find his best position, he has the potential to be a cornerstone of that offensive line for years. Mansour Delane, the cornerback out of LSU, was another pick that made perfect sense even if it wasn't the flashiest selection on the board. The Bengals had a clear need at cornerback, And when the best corner available fell into their laps, they didn't hesitate. There was a moment where they could have reached for Ruben Baines and addressed the pass rush, but the front office made a calculated decision. Too many mock drafts had Baines going to Cincinnati, which meant every other team in the league was expecting that move. Sometimes the best strategy is to take the player that fills your biggest need rather than the player the media expects you to take. Spencer Fino going to the Baltimore Ravens was the epitome of a best player available pick. The Ravens didn't overthink it. They didn't try to get cute. They looked at their board, saw who the best remaining prospect was, and made the pick. In a draft where so many teams seemed paralyzed by analysis, Baltimore's simplicity was refreshing. And with a new defensive-minded head coach coming in, adding a talented player to the front is never going to be the wrong call. The concept of tweener guards also emerged as a legitimate trend in this draft. Francis Mino, an offensive tackle who can play guard, represents a new breed of offensive linemen that NFL teams are starting to covet. The traditional model of drafting a left tackle, a right tackle, and 3 interior linemen is giving way to a more fluid approach where versatility along the line is valued as highly as elite play at any single position. This shift makes sense when you consider how modern NFL defenses operate. Blitz packages are more creative than ever. Stunts and twists come from every angle. Having linemen who can slide between positions and handle different assignments without missing a beat gives an offense a significant advantage in protection and in the running game. The days of one position offensive linemen might be numbered. Omar Cooper out of Indiana is another name worth watching. The wide receiver was productive and consistent on a team that made the national championship, but the criticism around him has been that he was overshadowed by other receivers on his own roster. That's a lazy evaluation. Being productive on a team loaded with weapons is harder than being the only option, not easier. Defenses can't focus on you when there are other threats, but that also means fewer targets and fewer opportunities to put up eye-popping numbers. Cooper's consistency, despite playing alongside other talented receivers, actually speaks to his reliability and his ability to win even when he's not the primary focus of the offense. These aren't the picks that generate the most Twitter engagement or the hottest sports talk debates. But 5 years from now, when we look back at the 2025 draft, don't be surprised if some of these names are among the biggest contributors from this class. Step back from the individual picks for a moment and look at the 2025 NFL draft as a whole. What does it tell us about where the league is heading? First and most obviously, teams are more afraid of quarterbacks than they've ever been. The bust rate at the position over the last 5 years has been staggering, and the financial implications of getting it wrong are crippling. A first-round quarterback who doesn't pan out doesn't just waste a draft pick. It sets an entire franchise back 3 to 5 years. It costs coaches their jobs. It costs general managers their careers. And in an era where every decision is scrutinized in real time on social media, the pressure to get it right has never been higher. That fear has created a paradox. Teams need quarterbacks more than ever because the position has never been more important to winning in the NFL. But teams are also more reluctant than ever to pull the trigger on one because the downside of getting it wrong has never been more severe. The result is what we saw in 2025, a thin quarterback class that got pushed down the board, with teams convincing themselves that they can find their guy later or develop someone who falls to them, rather than aggressively going up to grab one. Second, the edge rusher market is changing. There was a time when a talented pass rusher was the safest pick in the draft outside of quarterback. If you could get to the quarterback, you were going in the top 5. Period. But in 2025, 2 elite edge prospects fell significantly below where they were projected, and teams didn't seem to lose sleep over it. The league is starting to value complete defenders, guys who can rush the passer and set the edge and drop into coverage, over pure speed rushers who might be one-dimensional. Third, versatility has become the ultimate currency. Players like Arvo Reese, Kendrick Falk, and Sonny Styles, guys who can line up at multiple positions and contribute in different ways, were highly coveted throughout the first round. The modern NFL defense is moving toward positionless football, where the labels of linebacker, safety, and edge rusher are becoming increasingly blurry. The players who can exist in those gray areas are the ones commanding premium draft capital. And fourth, the programs that develop players are winning the draft, while the programs that simply collect talent are falling behind. The Clemson situation is the clearest example. Having 4 first-round talents means nothing if those players aren't developed properly and put in positions to showcase their abilities against top competition. Meanwhile, programs that consistently produce NFL-ready prospects regardless of their recruiting rankings are the ones that front offices trust most. The 2025 draft class will ultimately be judged by the players, not the picks. Some of the guys taken in the top 10 will be perennial All-Pros. Some will be out of the league in 4 years. That's the nature of the draft, and it's what makes it the most exciting and agonizing event on the NFL calendar. But the trends that emerged this year aren't going away. The quarterback fear isn't going away. The edge rusher devaluation isn't going away. The premium on versatility isn't going away. These are the forces that will shape how NFL teams build their rosters for the foreseeable future. And for the franchises that got it right this year, the ones that identified the true difference makers and had the courage to pull the trigger, the 2025 draft could be the foundation of something special. For the ones that let fear drive their decisions, well, the NFL has a way of making those teams pay for their hesitation. The real question isn't who won draft night. It never is. The real question is which of these picks will still look brilliant 3, 5, 10 years from now, and which ones will become cautionary tales that future general managers study to avoid making the same mistakes. Only time will answer that. But if this draft taught us anything, it's that the NFL is changing faster than most people realize, and the teams that adapt will be the ones lifting the Lombardi Trophy.